on Facebook. My name is AJ Rojas. I'm a friend of Vince's, so I'm going to help out with some of the questions. This is Vincent Haycock, Florence Welch.
Hi. Hey.
Cool. So we've just released a film for the Odyssey, like all the videos that you guys created together, so we're just going to talk a little bit about them freely and have just a nice conversation about it in front of some beautiful people here as well, and people online all around the world. Cool. So I remember being on the set of Lover to Lover, which was like the last album off, or sorry, the last video off the last album, and I remember kind of like it was kind of a new thing for Florence, I guess, like exploring that world, like that aesthetic, and having that kind of narrative being explored. So I don't know, Florence, you want to talk a little bit about that experience and also how that kind of led into keeping working with Vince after that, and kind of how the Odyssey developed. You know?
Yeah, it was interesting because I think Ceremonials had such a strong aesthetic. Like it was quite specific. It was quite grand, almost like quite like austere. It was. We were looking at a lot of like Erte and Klimt, and so it was, you know, that it was like yeah, it was kind of grand and quite glamorous.
Yeah.
And I think after, it's like almost like after 2 years or it was like a year and a half of like living in that world, it starts to kind of like wear you down a bit. And I think when I met Vince and he had like this little idea for Lover to Lover that seemed so simple and raw, I was really ready to do something just completely different. Because I mean, we'd done really like extravagant videos with like loads of like hair and costume changes and stuff, and I think I was just really ready to do something that was very raw. And Vince in like the doing it was a really amazing experience actually, because Vince actually didn't, again, I don't mean to put this in a weird way, but didn't do much or didn't tell me to do much. He just like let stuff happen, and it was really liberating actually.
Yeah. And I don't know, Vince, for you, oh wow, now it's loud. For you, like, you want to talk a little bit about how you developed the original like idea, if there was like a specific image or like a lyric or something just before each video and stuff. Yeah, for the Odyssey.
Well, I think that when we approached it, Florence was coming at the new album from a very personal, and I think probably all of our albums came from a very personal, but I think this one specifically being her like her third album, and being able to have like some time off and reflect on her life a little more, she came to me with very personal explanations for the song. So like when I did Sweet Nothing and Lover to Lover with her, I just listened to the track and interpreted it in my own way. But after we got to know each other and we kind of came to these songs, I was able to have a more personal insight from Florence. So I think we kicked off the conversation for the Odyssey from her explaining the real life Odyssey that she's been living through, and so the imagery in conjunction with listening to the songs came sort of naturally from the conversations of like what kind of stuff we like, how we're gonna dance, sort of this journey. And so immediately for both of us, we started thinking of like the great pieces of literature that were written, like Homer's Odyssey, Dante's Inferno, other poetry, T.S. Eliot, the different things that like were about people taking these grand journeys and sort of returning back and transcending like a sort of fantasy world.
Yeah.
So from there we just kind of started developing.
But kind of was like free flowing a bit, right? Because it wasn't completely planned from the beginning.
Yeah, because there's like one idea. There was like the kind of like, I guess the sort of like the car crash at the beginning. It's kind of like where it was kind of like the idea of like the performer and the real person. And over this year, I decided that I actually wanted those boundaries to be a lot less defined. You know, to be one person, to be the same on stage and off, to kind of be because I'd made them so far away through like the process of getting famous. You get very scared, and so you build up more and more and more like walls of like to protect yourself. And over that year, I just decided like, okay, I want those boundaries to be very blurred, which brought in a lot of stuff, like bringing in a lot of stuff from my real life, like real, and wanting that. And yes, but also there's like an element of when the car crash happens, it's as if you go from like performer Florence could be driving like to a gig somewhere, and I kind of descend into this like there's like all these levels. There's like hell, there's heaven, there's like confusing bit, there's my house.
Yeah.
And I think there's a very clear, like, the film's about love and sort of finding yourself, and I think there's a scene in it where after the car crash she climbs out and she's sort of walking and she's like finding her, she kind of walks out into this, it's just a freeway overpass, but we picked a bridge because in a lot of those classic stories there's these bridges that are crossings between two worlds, and I think for me it was really about creating the Florence that the world knows when you go to a live show, and then the Florence that I had met through those videos and the stuff she had told me, and just kind of trying to find a really fantastical way to explain that in a very like personal, but yet it's so abstracted from like a personal thing because it's fantasy.
Yeah. I guess in terms of like blurring the line between performer and the work that you guys did, like Ship to Wreck must have been a pretty big one in terms of like this is your real house, these are like your real friends, stuff like
that. One actually stressed me out to watch it because I'm actually like really kind of like
breaking my stuff.
No, I know. And like I heard it was like, but it was important to me again to just be. It was so much layers of like reality and unreality. It got really like confusing because it was like making the nightmare into a dream, then into another nightmare where there's like 100 people in your house and they're messing all your stuff up. I'm like, I already did this in real life. Why am I doing it again?
Yeah. And then her dad's there and her cousins
my dad was there and my cousin, and I was like jumping at the table, like throwing my cousin on the floor, which is like, and recreating this chaotic time in my life that was actually real. I was dancing on the tables and smashing things.
That's why it works, right? Because you're not pretending. Those are actually like, I mean, your house. That's exactly what it looks like. That's what you're doing.
It felt, and I kind of learned through this that if it feels uncomfortable, you might be doing something that you should just keep it going. But it was such a test for me because like I'm actually quite like particular about like where things go and everything has a place, and then literally it was just like. So it was like a lot of my own boundaries and my own like defenses I had to kind of just break down.
Yeah.
But it was good. It was good to kind of like reclaim it, reclaim that chaos and make it into something. Because before I think I was just breaking stuff and nothing was getting made. It was just like breaking stuff, ruining things, and then you don't get anything out of it.
So wait, when you finished that video, you just stayed home.
Yeah. No, she went to a hotel because we were still in her house.
So now when I watch it, I'm just like, oh. But I really love seeing it in actually the context of like the whole thing, because it really felt like the kind of like, it's like you're going in this spiral and the loops keep getting like smaller and smaller and smaller, and then when you get into the house bit, it really feels like. And my friend actually came up to me, my best friend from school, and she was like, I really understood. Because I thought that's what you were doing that whole year. Like me outside in the garden, kind of like drunkenly floating around, and then there's a me in the house trashing it. She was like, I really thought that's what was happening.
Yeah.
So it felt good that it kind of like, I don't know, I think from when people saw the whole thing, it somehow like made it, all the little bits of it make more sense.
Yeah. That's one of my favorites, I think, from the whole thing, and also it's probably the most like British one in some way,
Well, all the little stairwells.
And I feel, you feel like the kind of the old like film references too and stuff in that one. And I wonder like in terms of environments and stuff, because you guys kind of traveled the world for this, so maybe you want to speak a little bit about how the environments like influence the films that you guys are making, or how that kind of came about.
I think that
because what are the different countries that you guys visited?
Yeah, well, there was actually a very clear, if anything was outlined in the beginning, I think the environments were actually probably the most logical choices, because the story is based on love, and the love initiated in Los Angeles, and Florence was out there doing work, and after we initially met, she came out and played the Hollywood Bowl, which is right between the crucifix and the Hollywood sign, which is very clear lyric and How Big How Blue, and there's all these references to LA, so LA was like the present Florence for the story. And then we chose Mexico because we wanted we wanted something a little more like
it'd become
mystical sort of
interested in like James Turrell, and because again like all of these, we've been looking at a lot of like quite grand like paintings and stuff for the previous albums, and this we actually started looking at like copper colors and like earthy things,
sculptural,
and sculptural, structural stuff,
and a lot of like religious
Yeah,
themes
and like
bodies and forms and stuff.
And yeah, and Terrell had kind of has this temple that he'd built, and we were really and also like the cenotes were really important because they were said to be portals from like the living into the underworld. So that was like again like in the idea of journeying and kind of finding yourself. That was it was an important place to go. And that how beautiful dance is actually performed on a stage built by Terrell over a cenote. So it was kind of like it was the portal where it first came out was like from the underworld out, which is so the locations were actually really important.
Yeah, and then I think if you go through it, LA was the base. St. Jude felt so perfect to do it with. I think it's a subtle thing in the film, but What Kind of Man took place in the present at the chateau in Los Angeles, and in the past, like in the 50s in Mexico, and St. Jude is actually set in our minds in the 50s, and it's subtle, but you don't, it's a 1950s Buick, and it's the clothes are a reference to the 1950s, and then you jump straight into Shipwreck, which is the present again. Florence is battling the same stuff in the present, and then you jump back to the past in Queen of Peace, and it's a very subtle shift, and she's from Scotland, and it was just so we wanted something. Queen of Peace is a very big song and very epic, so we kind of, and then we returned back to Los Angeles, so it would go full circle, so that she started in LA and then kind of like went through the different wars. She was living in London, being in LA, this relationship back and forth. So it's sort of like the locations we knew the beginning and the end when we started. Yeah. The middle we sort of figured out as we evolved, but.
Because it was funny, when I was making the record, I realized that there could be a map to go along with the record too. You could make like a little map of things where events had taken place, and that was the kind of what I was like, this is like a map of this year, and then we just kind of like recreated it.
If you do the map, you see Vince's face.
That's what it looks like.
And I'm like this, I'm like,
Cool. And then like a pretty big thing was dance. In the films, Shipwreck is one that has probably the least amount of dancing, but all the other films have. And I feel like there was kind of because Ryan Heffington did a few of the videos, and then Holly did the rest. Do you guys want to talk a little bit about that, the collaboration with Ryan and with Holly, and just dance in general in the films, what it kind of represented?
Florence came to me with the very first thing. Actually, before I even met with Flo about the songs, I think Hannah, Florence manager, sent me an email and said, "Hey, this is a video of her rehearsing. She's been dancing, and just check this out. She wanted you to see this because she wants to incorporate." I think it was something that she was just very passionate about doing in her personal life, and said if we can incorporate this into the future videos, it would be. So it was actually the first thing that I saw, any visual or any conversation before I heard any music, was just. Florence wants to dance.
What were the kind of movements in that?
And it was a very modern, very expressive,
abstract. Because that's what Holly and Ryan are both very emotional choreographers. It's nothing. It's not really about technicality. It's just about expressing a feeling that perhaps there's not even a word for. And I think that's what's so amazing about dance is you can express in movement stuff that there just isn't a language for. It has its very own it's kind of like it's like so forward and then so kind of like natural at the same time. You can kind of express stuff that is impossible otherwise. And also I was like having some time off, and I needed an outlet that wasn't just like getting wasted, like trashing the place, and wasn't performing because I wasn't performing. And dance was actually, I found it like in that year, and Holly and I used to work together twice a week sometimes, and I would just do, and because Holly, she's a very emotional choreographer, and it would be taking on someone else's story for a while. So it introduced like the idea of acting, because she would take things from her life that she would give to me, and then I would that I would do, and so it really kind of like it started the whole process, and then I knew that it was like. I'd found even like a new language that was...
Right. I think that's what's interesting about dance in the films especially, is that each one of the movements has kind of its own narrative as well, right? That complements like...
They were always built, they were always built around... Florence would explain the song to me and what it meant to her, I would digest that through my filter. She experiences the real life experience, puts it through her filter, which is the music, then explains that to me. I'd put it through my filter narratively, conceptually, and then I would tell Ryan what it's about, and Ryan or Holly, and they would then put it through their filter and translate that yet again. So it was always like really like a strict theme, like this move needs to be about this subject, but then put through those filters, it developed into like a language that kind of we could own, like whatever move it was, we would develop like that's the move that's about this attitude. That's the move
like
this
for
attitude.
an example.
Well, when I was telling Ryan like what had like happened, or like, you know, especially like with a difficult relationship, I was like, it's like sometimes this person is like going like that, and then you come towards them, and then you go too much, and it's like that, and then they push you away, and you go away again, and then you come back, and it's okay, and then you go forward, and then it's too much, and you go. So we actually like came up with this like move that is in How Big How Blue, which is just trying to describe.
And in Queen of Peace again.
And in
like
Queen of Peace,
like,
this
like
this trying to describe the difficulties of like a relationship that you want to work, but it's just the two people. It's just not quite. You both keep returning, but something is just not. And so actually that move, and I think that was again a theme of like two people who kind of just keep returning to something, and these idea of purgatories and repeating patterns. So the repeated, you know, this move is about things you can't say, you know, you're just trying to put it straight into someone's mouth. And so this kind of idea of the repetition and the kind of, because you really do sometimes you just feel like, how are we going over this again? You know?
It's interesting because there's no clear narrative through line, right, between all the films where you like follow it like that. But I think there's moments that are kind of repeated in some way, where some of the dance elements, like in Queen of Peace, when you're dancing around the group of people who are fighting, they're kind of ignoring you as you're dancing around. And I think that happens in Ship to Wreck a little bit too, when you're on the table and people, you know what I mean? So there's kind of those elements as well. And then also one of the big kind of elements too is a doppelganger thing. So maybe where did that come from?
I mean, I think, you know, it's funny, we were talking about it earlier today of what inspired some of those things, and a lot of it was like referencing old paintings and stuff, like looking at the body language of pain or like love, and the way that like the Renaissance painters would interpret that, and we would sort of like take that iconography, and because I didn't know anything about dance before starting this project. I'm a horrible dancer myself, and also
I can attest to that.
And also I hadn't really shot dance, so when Ryan was like, well, what do you want the dance to be like, I went back and did a bunch of research and came back with like Renaissance paintings and said, I want all these like men, like in Homer's Odyssey, the suitors chase, I'm blanking on her name right now, but anyway, the suitors chase, there's all these men that chase the woman, and I can't even remember the name. But I was trying to explain what kind of men, and I found like some Fusilli paintings, some Caravaggio paintings, and I sort of showed them to Ryan and said, like, what if it felt like this? Like, that's Florence, and there's this like, and like a lot of Dore, who did all the inscriptions for Dante's Inferno, like these men kind of coming out of the ground and just attacking her, and then she breaks through, and then in the next painting, they're carrying her very gently, and that's like where the St. Jude thing came, where the man's carrying her. So we sort of like took those emotional pieces and then created dance out of it, and then turned it back into narrative pieces, and we just it was a real experimentation. But I think thematically we were always really wanting to just be like, this moment we want to be sensitive because that's what the song is calling for.
But those are the kind of the best references too, right? When it's not like this is a reference for dance, it's a totally different reference that you have to kind of like make
reinterpret into your own.
It's a different form.
Look at this painting. Let's make this painting into a dance, rather than like looking at this dance and doing our version of a dance. You know, it's like imagining stuff that isn't dancey.
And I think the fun thing though is that like I would like to think that the painter that was painting the paintings was trying to communicate the same struggle or whatever. And then so we just said, oh, that looks painful or violent, and then that one looks really peaceful and beautiful, or that one looks sexual, and that one looks whatever, and then we would kind of like riff off, and then after the What Kind of Man, we sort of abandoned those references because we had built the language, and then we just kind of kept evolving it and kind of let Ryan and
the kind of like the doppelganger thing was pretty simple, because I think as we would, I was writing this record, I kept talking to Vince about like what was happening, and I think there was a real conflict in my life at that time between a side of me that is quite calm and like more introverted perhaps and quieter, and then there's another side of me that is kind of like raging nightmare.
Yeah.
And it was like I kept getting tripped up by this other side in that year, and I really was quite conflicted as to who, you know, because I'd been touring for so long, and you know, you're just caught in this whirlwind, and when you're left to your own devices, I was really wrestling with two sides of myself at that time. And it's so interesting because I think it was like it definitely started off the beginning of the process, and of definitely of writing about a kind of like a love for another person and desperately needing a love for another person. I think as the videos evolved, even and when you introduced the doppelganger and forced me to like hug myself, it's a really emotional moment, because I think you sort of realize it was about trying to re-find a relationship with yourself.
Yeah.
So, which was so like, I didn't even think about that like until I was like faced with me, and even though we're kind of like fighting, then we had to hug, and it was actually very like because you think it's all about something that's outside you, and something external is going to make this better. And I think through the process of like doing the videos, you realize that actually like it's a kind of like, it was like quite a healing process, I think, having to face myself all the time and like really wrestle and fight.
I remember you and Dana sitting in Delilah in that chair when you're hugging her, you're sitting there, and you guys were like falling asleep.
We really
you guys like grabbed each other.
Because we've been like hitting each other, and you know.
It's a lot of hitting.
So it was really like, and I think it was kind of, you go and it was just trying to find some kind of like peace with something, I think, and the videos were all about like the things that you're wrestling with to try and find that, whether it was like love or something else, you know, all these demons. I was going to say it sounds so dramatic, but yeah. I can't say that it's dramatic, we had an actual demon. It was quite literal.
So I guess this is the first time people have seen Third Eye. You guys want to talk a little bit about that, like how you came up with the last video, or what what that shoot was like?
I think Third Eye. Well, we didn't know exactly what song was going to be the end when we started, but we knew the end was going to be Florence returning to stage. And when I started it, when I met Florence, when I first met Florence, I think I'd seen you guys play at like a festival a few years ago, but I didn't know you. I sort of saw it, festival style where you see it, and then I met her and was like, wow, it's like, there's like a polarity, sort of like these two versions of her, right?
Yeah.
So when we first started talking about it, we were like, let's do this thing where we'll see like kind of the real Florence. In the beginning, she's driving in a car, and she's actually dressed the way Florence dresses in the car, and then she gets in this car wreck, and she leaves behind that person, like leaves that person there, and then goes on to through this journey, and then returns back. You see Rob walk in the middle of the video, the music drops out, and they walk on stage. That was always going to be the plan, was wherever we go.
Rob did get a really big chair at the premiere.
Yeah, he did. And I always wanted Florence to return to stage, because that's like where she's probably most confident and powerful and singular. Like when she's on stage, it's like it becomes this singular thing, like the world sort of gets put into the shadow, and she performs. So that, I think that part for Third Eye, we always knew what we wanted, and then Third Eye we wanted to, it made sense to end with, because it's sort of a positive song, and we wanted the end to have this return to like the real Florence who's gone on this journey, and she returns back to the real person that we all know, and you see Rob, and then she's singing, you hear her voice, the song drops out, so there's no more artifice and no more sort of music video. We just wanted to kind of like let it be her on stage in a more natural setting.
Is that what it felt like?
It was really kind of emotional though, because I think the state I was in, like when we made the first video, compared to like how I felt a year later?
Year and a half.
Year and a half later was like, it wouldn't have felt real if I was choosing a positive song and I wasn't in a much better place. So actually, as the videos progressed, things did change for me, and I learned much more about myself, and kind of, it was like every video was a kind of like an exorcism or a catharsis, and so by the time it came to Third Eye, I really felt like I could own that.
Right.
I was like, you know.
And the lyrics there, like, I'm the same, I'm the same.
And
it really, like, when we were watching it, because, you know, we had the same crew pretty much the entire film. Everybody watching it had like a pretty significant kind of moment in the audience. Like, I remember seeing like Natasha watching on stage, like in the audience, just like, because we were all sort of experiencing, like, we all knew the story and knew what we were doing, knew where it was going, and to sort of watch you singing those lyrics a cappella, and sort of like, it was good. It was a great moment.
So much about like just trying to like change, to try and like not repeat that sort of record. I just felt like I was repeating myself all the time, or ending up in like painful situations or conversations, or I've done it again, you know. And I was like, but it's literally purgatory. You're just like, I can't fucking believe I did that again. And it was a sense of like really wanting to change, or to try and like do, you know. And so when it was like singing that at the end, it really meant something, you know. And I was hoping that maybe things had changed a bit, and it felt like they had. You know.
Nice. Cool. All right, let's maybe I can ask a couple of these questions from fans. Yeah. Let's look through here. You guys having fun? Yeah.
You guys are right out there.
Great. Cool.
I'm a bit guilty talking about something you haven't seen.
Let's do this question from FATM. I don't know what that stands for. No. FATM girl. All right. Which music video was the most meaningful to the both of you?
Oh, that's so difficult.
Both of us. It has to be the same video?
No.
Oh, which music video? Independent?
Yeah.
Do you know what? When I don't know. They all. I think when I watched it on the big screen, Delilah really like. Because I think there's something about, like, it really seemed to capture what we'd been looking for, which was the idea of like bringing in the paintings, the Inferno, like the sort of the almost like possession-like nature of the choreography, the actual like demon, and the kind of like, it was like, it reminded me of like what it was like when I was in that zone of like the kind of sketchy, like really self-destructive, like, and it seemed to like it was really like it really connected, because I could see that really clearly, the chaos and the self-destruction, and it was but in big it was like whoa.
So the darkest one.
The darkest. I like the dark. Well, that's it. Delilah in the journey is like where it's got.
That was the bottom. That was at the bottom.
That's why you're trying to like pull back, but you can't. Oh no, I'm back in it again. You're trying to wind it down, and it's not happening.
I think for me, it's St. Jude.
It's so much.
Just because I think there was something like when we shot that was the most, like, from a filmmaker standpoint, that was probably the most spontaneous and successfully spontaneous shoot I've ever done. We decided that morning what St. Jude was going to be. Literally, like, I kind of had an idea. We scouted the place. We went back. Me, Steve, and Ari got together. We threw up a couple lights, waited for sunset. We had finished shooting the What Kind of Man stuff. I said, okay, we have like 15 minutes to shoot St. Jude. Is everything ready? And we just like, we shot 3 takes in 20 minutes. And so for me, and then I would say, I think that like probably Delilah is my second favorite, but St. Jude and also Long and Lost, the two like single take. The choreography and the sort of success of doing a single take impromptu like that. And the what that takes between Florence and the cinematography and the team to do those were the most satisfying to make. They were really like just like. And watching her perform and without a cut live like that in pretty extreme, like Mexico was like 100 and some degrees, it was miserable and hot, Scotland was like negative 10 degrees on a boat in the North Sea.
It was moving.
You know, like so.
Like literally, the ferry was just charging out to sea, and I'm doing like interpretive dance, and there's a camera going around, and then I have to walk like I'm going to walk off the boat. But it's really quite. You don't realize how much you forget about yourself, and that's the actual best thing about performance. I think is you just get to forget about yourself for that moment.
And like the thing you don't see on Long and Lost is like right when we cut, me and like a couple other people running to the front to secure Florence and the Steadicam operator so they don't go overboard, and like the gate rushing up to stop because the waves are coming, and to sort of scramble to make sure everybody's not going to drown. Like, you know, that extremity
those were
makes
moments when I was like, I wanted to do this. I did want to do this.
Cool. There's a question from I am Abby N15. This one's good because I think it's good to talk about like specific elements of the film. So this one's very specific. It's like, and I guess people can interpret this the way they want, but she wants to know from you guys. Can you explain the meaning behind the movement in Delilah where you're kneeling and praying and then praying, I don't know, and dramatically lift your head up and back?
Okay. Well, that was like me and Holly, and I think. Kind of like the Delilah was again about self-destruction and also about kind of like power balances, and so the song itself was kind of written like loosely on waiting. The thing about relationships now is that so much of it takes place in your phone. So it was like waiting for someone to call you or text you back becomes like a new kind of agony, like this new, and your phone, instead of being this just the thing you talk to people, becomes like something that can make you or break you. So that was like that feeling of purgatory, and also it was like a Samson and Delilah biblical reference, which was about like I will do anything to make this stop. So this kind of like taking power, like cutting someone's hair.
And it was also like very literally like banging your head against the wall. Like we were talking about like these repetitions the whole time.
So you're kind of like, so there's a sense to like almost it was like and it was almost like you keep breaking the relationship, or like you actually like, it's like as if you've like killed someone, you know, and you loved them, you didn't want to, why do you keep, and so it's this kind of like you're praying and you're banging your head against a wall, but it's also you've been possessed by this kind of like dark power from taking like someone's hair. It was like there's a lot of mixed things going on there, but I think Holly managed to like pretty succinctly get it into
She took all those abstract ideas and just said, Florence, slam your head into this thing over and over again, and I will communicate it.
But sometimes I was like just like literally like banging our head against the wall.
This is a good question here from Sophia Legia, I think you pronounced her last name. This one is, can Florence share the story behind the poem that's in between, which it's between
Queen of Peace
and Long and Lost. Was it written before when was it written, and just talk a little bit about that.
It was on the day.
Well, we shot Queen of Peace on Easdale Island, which is just right outside Oban, Scotland. And it's literally an island. You had to take the ferry. We all stayed on this island, and I just remember going like, I think we need a poem in a Scottish voice. We spent like a couple weeks up there, and there's all these amazing people and this Paul Donnelly, who is our fight coordinator, and he's also in there. Just had this amazing voice, and then we had young Mikey, who plays like the guy beating the other kid up, and they had such great voices, and they were so different from each other that. I don't know. We just were like, we need to capture
You thought that there should be a poem, and I quite like writing things. I quite like writing things that already like. I'm like, okay, this has a brief. And so I was just trying to think about love, because I think that's just the overriding theme of the whole Odyssey and actually like you know. I think I've always had quite like overwhelming feelings, and I think that's why I've always been drawn to water imagery, because it's that sense of being absorbed by something bigger than you, or things being washed away, and
I think I said like something just inspired by like the coastline and the
well, just to kind of like give yourself to the sea, like as if the sea would be your lover, or and so it would be so much bigger that it could absorb your like whole self. I think that's a lot of just wanting to kind of transcend sort of the physical.
And to be specific, it was, I think, Florence gave it to me the same day it was recorded.
Yeah.
So it was written like the night before in Scotland, and then we recorded. The last thing we did on that shoot was record them in this like little coastal house in Scotland while it was pouring rain that night. Like we sat and recorded them before we could take the ferry back. So it was very like dramatic.
And it made me think about like the waves were like, so say the sea is like the mother to the waves, and she just has to watch her children throwing themselves again and again against the beach. Like they don't ever stop. They leave her and they just throw themselves onto the sand. And I thought kind of that was like, it reminded me of the sort of throwing yourself at someone again and again and again and again, like we were talking about these cycles and like this, not being able to break the pattern. So it's quite thinking about things quite deeply at that time.
So deep. I mean, the film is like itself, just the video is kind of put together with some interstitial moments. So if you guys have any questions in terms of the films that you guys already seen, like some of the music videos, that'd be cool. Anybody? In Queen of Peace?
Nice question.
So in Queen of Peace, what was the symbolism behind
the family and the children?
Kids,
Well, I think that like, when we talk about, I mean, I think just to point some of the obvious things out, that Odyssey is about love. And it's about Florence finding herself through the storm or the turbulence of love as a performer and a person that has an off-screen or off-stage real life, because sometimes I think people think performers aren't real when they go home and have like the normal struggle that everybody else has.
I spent a lot of time, I felt really guilty because I spent so much time like in like leggings and a hoodie writing this record. So like I was really trying to get it done, and I was like, oh, I'm really like betraying like all these clothes.
I'm wearing.
We didn't get that far as though it was just shooting the video where it was actually like me in sweatpants.
Almost. So in that context, we're thinking like the Queen of Peace and the idea of. It was a lot inspired by the song, to be honest, like the lyrics and kind of what we talked about that song was about. But then we started thinking about like youth and the idea of innocence, and having, as you grow up, you sort of lose your innocence and you go through all these kind of harder processes in life, and then returning back or giving love an innocent look. Like when you're I think that girl Kate was her name, and Finn, they were like 12 or 13 or something, and like when you don't really suffer as much as a little kid. You're like, things look great and beautiful and shiny. You kind of have like maybe a less pessimistic view of the world. So I think that the idea was that she's giving back to like the youth a little bit, or letting go of things and letting the younger version of Florence just like enjoy love a little bit. And like the kid gets beat up and she's there to like sort of
still pretty dramatic though.
It's pretty dramatic,
yeah. It's kind of like doing, because we were talking about like this idea of like finding yourself and like learning how to kind of take care of yourself even, and like learning how to, instead of like you just like it was like your little like, it was like and it was that again was also quite emotional, because I think so it was like doing the doppelganger, but in a different way, like even like the child.
Right, I'm sure that's what you want to know if it represented her as well.
It was like doing another me, but in like even a different.
Instead of doing the identical you, it was doing the like the youth that's inside Florence that was,
And my family is, my grandmother is Scottish, so it's all like Scottish on that side, so it made sense. She would have been very, very happy.
Anyone else? Go ahead.
I was wondering about the character, like, I think it's between Mother and Delilah, but you're sort of like in, you're sort of in like the motel and you're like sharing water. Is it meant to be Virgil, the person that you're sharing water with?
Virgil, that's so good.
Strong.
Wait, say that again.
I think it's between Mother and Delilah. Florence is sitting like in the hallway.
Oh, right, with the guy, right? That she ends up killing later, right? Yeah.
He's the same guy, yeah.
Yeah.
Cut his hair off.
The idea was that, like, you know, if you read a lot of, if you read into like the purgatory or stuff like that, and that stuck in those like, they were like, he says something like, no, you know, if you want to go, he gives her this advice that you should leave here because she's been stuck in purgatory. And Delilah, for both of us, was the return back to Florence, to the real Florence. So the water, that's a really good reference. I don't think we thought it that deeply.
Just say we did.
Yeah, but yeah, but the idea was like that everybody in purgatory is sort of thirsty, you know, because it's hot and miserable, and we just thought it was like a really good way for them to be sharing and stuff. And so it does reference those characters, not specifically Virgil, but it was definitely of that ilk, you know.
He was Virgil, and then he was Samson.
Yeah.
Just going from like Bible to Inferno, everything.
Sort of smashing it all together.
But it was that was a kind of like, again, for me, it was interesting because, you know, there was a part of me that was like, do I want to let that go, that time? You know, sometimes you don't want to sometimes the pain is comforting. You know, you get so used to it, and you get so used to kind of like the chaos and the drama, it becomes like, and so like, do you want to leave? And that was what Delilah was really interesting, because it was almost like reenacting like those spaces and those feelings, and yeah, it was quite like, you have to like, yeah, it's strange because there's a bit of you that is like nostalgic for or
pain.
Pain, yeah.
I feel that way a lot of the time. Anyone else? One more. Let's do one more question. Anyone? Right there. Go ahead.
Do you think?
Hi.
Have you reached a balance after the Odyssey, like between your wild side of the HB and the Florence in ceremonial?
Do you know what? That's good. That's a good question. I think it was almost like, I think it was almost like I really had to, after ceremonials, I had to strip everything so far back to like baseline. So that's why it was just like, okay, just like, you know, white suits, very like raw, but I think they're like, over time the shirts and the blouses are gradually like coming back, and the dresses are getting bigger and the sleeves. So my maximalist like never really, it's always there, and it just kind of comes creeping back, and you just see the stage dresses like gradually getting a bit bigger.
The less we in Florence hang out, the more embroidery shows up.
The more embroidery starts.
we do a video, and I make her wear like jeans and shirts, so she's like.
But I really needed to do that because it was like, you can use it was so much about not hiding, you know, and I think you can try and define yourself by like what you're wearing, or like, and a dress will dictate how you move, and I didn't want anything to dictate the performance or the emotion. It had to be it just, you know, the feelings and the performance had to speak for itself rather than what you were wearing. But I think, like, yeah, we haven't done a video for a while, and now my dresses are like really pink and floaty, so I don't know what that means.
Were you asking like if she personally has changed?
As a person? I'm just deflecting with clothes talk from like the real deep stuff.
If you think about like your journey
and as like a human, yes. Because I think actually with ceremonials, what was external was very controlled, but internal was completely chaotic and like unbalanced, and there's like a lot of quite turbulent stuff going on. And so I think actually
it's kind of the opposite now.
And so actually externally, by just putting it out there and being as like wild and turbulent and chaotic as I could, it brought much more of a calm to my life. Does that make sense? Yeah. So like creatively, by putting up walls to stop seeing what was actually happening, it makes it so much, you have to whatever's happening happens even more. Yeah. And I think actually by doing, and that's why I'm really grateful to you for letting me go there, because I think it was really healing for me, genuinely, like just to be like naked and yelling, and you know, because that's how you feel sometimes. So to be able to do that.
I've seen the change from an outside perspective. I've seen this. It's subtle because Florence has always been very nice, and loving, and warm person. She's like, it's not like she started off as evil, and but it's a subtle change. But it's definitely a change for sure. And I think that anytime, actors go through this all the time. You do a role, and you hear great actors saying they can't give up the role. They get off the set and they go home, and they're still that character for a while. And I think that because Florence is sort of playing herself, she was able to exercise a lot of the stuff and all the and you also have to talk with 100,000 people about what you're feeling on a set, the DP, the wardrobe stylist, the makeup, everybody. You sort of get it all out to everybody, the fans, interviews, and by the time you get home, you're just like, feel pretty good. Let's watch some reruns or something. Yeah, strong. Yeah.
Great.
So yeah, it really
Thank you.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, thank you guys.
Thank you.
I guess I don't know if there's anyone you guys want to thank personally. I guess now.
Wow. You go first.
Well, I'm so grateful to you for that we we just work with so many amazing people, and they gave up a year and a half of their lives to do this, and my management and label, you don't really get that kind of support, and they really just were fully there for us the whole way.
I think in my career, I've never really had a project where everybody was on board 100%. So I'd like to just thank Park Pictures and Love Management and the crew, especially the crew, Steve Annis and Ari Robbins and Holly and Ryan,
and to all the fans who was just there from the, it was definitely a change, and it was a new way of perhaps looking at the music, and a new way of, and actually people were so supportive and really embraced it, and no one was like, more props.
And Florence for giving up so much of her personal life for us to create some artwork.
But I think we're all indebted to Facebook. Thank you to Facebook so much.
Thanks, guys.
Cool. Thanks.
Thanks.
Great.
Thank you.
Welcome to Facebook.